For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. On infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections.
If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who want it until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious.
Violence and vandalism is being led by Antifa and other radical left-wing groups who are terrorizing the innocent, destroying jobs, hurting businesses, and burning down buildings. They are coming after me because I am fighting for you. That's what's happening.
Greetings, fellow thought criminals, and thank you for joining the insurrection. I'm Michael Lauber, and today I'm joined by Andrew Mahler, the writer over at The New American, Alex Newman's producer. You wear a lot of hats over there, Andrew.
I try. I'm going to need more heads.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I'm sure you guys have already heard the big news, and that's once again, SCOTUS has screwed America. And, I've been watching these decisions as they come out yesterday and today, and I don't know. I'm almost at the point where I feel like they want a civil war. We're going to go over more of the stories in detail here in a minute, but Supreme Court strikes down president's executive order on birthright citizenship in 5-4 decision. So this means, you can... have a woman go into labor, cross the U.S. border, 5 minutes later, deliver the baby, and that baby could be president. Same with this allows for birth tourism and everything else, which again goes on. Chinese couples fly into Guam, they drop the baby over there, and then they move back to communist China. Theoretically, that kid's an American. Well, now legally, that kid's an American citizen. They can come back at any time, and they could even run for president. But it isn't just the birthright citizenship; it's the election season ruling yesterday. We'll get to that in a minute. Which basically screws us on this upcoming election. And you already know, leftist states, California, Illinois, whatever, the counting is never going to stop until they get the result they want. And now there's little to nothing you can do about it. But on the other hand, they've upheld the ban on men in women's sports and vice versa. So that's made the left really angry. And it's this way, like down the line. It's like they are trying to cause more division. And ignoring the obvious here, when it's convenient, they allow modern interpretations, otherwise strict interpretation of the law. We'll get into that more as we get into the decisions. But I guess to start, what are your thoughts on this, Andrew?
Well, it's absurd. I mean, obviously, this is a complete warping of what the 14th Amendment was supposed to be when you talk about birthright citizenship. I mean, this is an amendment that was passed in the era of what we would call Reconstruction, in the post-Civil War world. And, people always talk about context and, historical context and going back and looking at that. And that's so true. You do need to do it. And this is in no way speaking about illegal immigration or, some Haitian migrant who comes over. Like, that is not what this is about. It is about slaves who were in the United States after emancipation receiving citizenship. That's what it is. It's obvious. Like, go and read the debates, go and read the newspaper articles, go and read literally any piece of historical information from the time this amendment, the 14th Amendment, was ratified. And you will see that the context in which it existed was in Reconstruction and, allowing slaves to become citizens. And as Kamala Harris said, we didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. We are bound by the circumstances of the context in which we were, floating in, or whatever she said. The same is true of the 14th Amendment. It didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. And it's not just whatever you want it to be. It exists within I can't believe I'm quoting Kamala. It exists within the context of its existence. And that is in the era of Reconstruction. So, I would like to talk about later, and I know you said we will, so I look forward to that, why the Supreme Court is doing this, and the misuse of the Supreme Court, where now it's law of the land and it's judicial supremacy and it's whatever the Supreme Court says goes. That is the exact opposite of what our founding fathers intended. And frankly, when I see the headlines about the Supreme Court, it just goes in one ear and out the other for me, because I try to view it as the founding fathers did, which is merely an opinion.
Yeah. Well, actually, you can go ahead and get into that in a second. Let me just add one other detail here related to specifically this case in the 14th Amendment. So, they've ruled on this previously, and with the sons of diplomats, or children of diplomats, I guess I should say, where they said no, they were not U.S. citizens, even though they were born here, because they were subject to the jurisdiction of the nation their family was from. So that it has been how they've interpreted this previously, but now, I mean, it's basically due to sympathy and I think empathy, or as they'd say, because to go back to the 14th Amendment, the former slaves, once freed, they had no other nation that they were allegiant to. They were born here and they were subject to our jurisdiction. That's why they deserved citizenship in the United States once they were freed slaves. That's not the case, though, especially today. We have people breaking the law, coming over here, intentionally dropping anchor babies so they can stay forever. Well, and that's, I guess, another thing. You know what? If they're going to have this interpretation, I guess if somebody comes here, has a kid, we're going to have to start deporting the parents and not letting them use that baby as an anchor. They can have a choice to take the baby with them. We'll have to make sure we don't pay out any kind of welfare benefits or anything for anybody with a foreign address. We're going to have to change laws. We're going to have to get creative. But we're going to have to, again, protect America. And again, this is interpreting a law that benefits foreign nationals over American citizens and allows essentially a rush of people coming in. So I don't know. Again, Congress, you're useless, but you're going to have to figure out how to do your job there.
Yeah, and Congress has a perfect opportunity to actually come in here, because Congress has complete power. No one talks about this, but it's a constitutional reality. They have complete power to impeach justices, right?
Yeah.
And Article 3 of the Constitution, which is the shortest of the articles, I will say, which tells you something about the importance of the Supreme Court. It's the shortest one.
Yeah.
It says that these judges can sit in their seat during times of good behavior. Now, good behavior isn't just saying please and thank you and folding your napkin on your lap. Good behavior is following the law, right? Bad behavior would be illegal. Good behavior would be legal. So if these Supreme Court justices are making decisions, right, we call them rulings, making decisions that are unconstitutional, that are bad, that are harmful to the American good, Congress has every single right to impeach those judges. This whole notion of a lifetime tenure and whoever the president appoints, and that with the advice and consent of the Senate gets confirmed, that is this big deal, and that person will be there until they're old and gray, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or dies. That is a false choice, a false reality that's been pitched to us. So Congress needs to step in and impeach these guys, but the president also has a role he can play, as Andrew Jackson did, which is basically saying to the Supreme Court, hey, pound sand. I am the executor of the laws. The laws don't derive from the judiciary. The laws derive from the legislative branch. And these are not laws that you're passing. These are opinions. These are decisions of what you think the law is interpreted to be. And now, as the executive, as the president, I have the choice to either adhere to that and apply it to my decision making, or discard it. And he has every right to discard it.
Yeah, and we don't even have to go back that far to see when this happened. Like just under the Biden regime, you remember the canceling student loan payments. The Supreme Court struck him down multiple times. He just kept redoing it. Changed the wording slightly to this. Then the case has to go back up. And again, this was a vote buying operation. They did see through that. But you know what? Again, maybe it's time for Trump and Congress to find their testicles and do the same thing here. Just start banning it, outlawing it. Now, in reality, what Congress really needs to do is pass a law defining the interpretation of the 14th Amendment and how it is going to be applied, and then send that up to the Supreme Court. But will they have the courage to actually do that? And that's the real problem. Is I don't right now. The current makeup for Congress certainly won't. And there's so many rhinos in there, as we're going to discuss here in a minute. Like say the 20 some odd that signed up for the voted for the Dignidad Act. There's just too many that'll screw us. That instead we'd end up with legislation that favored the Democrats' open border interpretation of this, and be right back where we were. But again, guys, this is why we've really got to concentrate on the primaries and start removing these people. There needs to be a real effort to actually do that and protect America. It isn't going to happen on its own, and they're going to keep rhinos up there in D.C. Until they breathe their last breath, because this is really about the uniparty and what they want. It's these trans Republicans. They identify as Republicans, but everybody knows they're really Democrats. They're globalists. We've got to eliminate that crowd once and for all.
Yes, exactly. That's so true. And is it okay if I take a couple seconds here and talk about like living
Yeah, go for
constitution
it.
versus original intent and some of that? Because I think it's so important.
Yes.
But just a little bit of a perspective setter, because everyone is always talking about these decisions and the law of the land and all this. So I just wanted to define some terms here really quick. So you have judicial activism, which is, basically this view that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, right?
Yeah.
That is loose constructionism. Judges act as policymakers, interpreting the Constitution to meet present needs. They view it as elastic. They view it as living. You'll hear academics say this frequently. It's a living, breathing document that adapts to the times, right? That is a poor version. You cannot go to the bank and say my mortgage is a living, breathing document that adapts to the times. You cannot go to any sort of court and say that with anything else, but they say it with the Constitution. And then you have judicial restraint, which is the camp that I would fall in, and I hope all of our listeners would. Original intent, right? Strict constructionalism. The judges only apply the clear meaning of the Constitution to make their decisions. So we're going back and we're looking at words in their meanings. We're looking at historical context. We're looking at what the authors of the Constitution said, because they wrote guidebooks in the Federalist Papers, an explaining guide as to what this meant. So that is so important. And Hamilton said in Federalist number 78, of course, the Federalist Papers were, explainers, footnotes, field notes, if you will, for the common everyday American as to what the Constitution meant. It was like a study guide. And this is what he said of the branches of government, in particular, the Supreme Court. He said, the executive, the president, not only dispenses the honors, but holds the sword of the community. So he's the protector, he's the executor, he's the figurehead. The legislature not only commands the purse, because they have, the power of tax revenue and spending money, but prescribes the rules by which the duties and rights of every citizen to be regulated. So they're the lawmakers, they're the financiers. The judiciary, on the contrary, has no influence over the sword or the purse, no direction either of the strength or of the wealth of the society. And this is it, can take no active resolution whatever. It may be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment, and must ultimately depend upon the aid of the executive, the president, arm, even for the efficacy of its judgments. And Lincoln, right, who was certainly more of a expansionist federal authority type figure, right? He definitely believed in a more strong executive. This is what he said in his first inaugural. He said, the candid citizen must confess that if the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having to that extent practically resigned their government into the hands of that eminent tribunal. So Lincoln recognized that this sort of idea of the Supreme Court being the final arbiter of what the law is or what the Constitution says is a really bad idea. And unfortunately, in the progressive era, as we headed into the 21st century, or the 20th century, we saw this getting more and more extreme. There was a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Charles Evan Hughes. He said in a speech in 1907, this guy was one of the first Supreme Court justices to be a living Constitution judicial activist. He said this: we are under a Constitution, but the Constitution is what the judges say it is. That was Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes over 100 years ago. So that is why we are in the state that we're in, is that we've seen the Congress, we've seen the executive, we've seen these two key branches within the pyramid of the three branches of government, they have disbanded and they've delegated their power to the Supreme Court because of this kind of academic ivory tower worldview that says, well, we need the law to be interpreted by the judges. We need people who went to Oxford and to Yale and to Harvard and to Princeton. These people have spent their lives poring over it, not some congressman like Tim Burchett, who's congressman from Tennessee, who spends his time in a woodshed making skateboards. He doesn't understand the Constitution. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who went to the Ivy League universities and spent her time in the coffee shops in New England with the poets and the lesbian theorists and all these people, that is who we need to tell us what the text says. That worldview has led us to where we are today. And the opposite is what the founding fathers intended. So the Supreme Court is not the supreme law of the land. All of these decisions should be viewed as opinions. That's why you have on the Supreme Court website the opinions tab, where they write their dissenting opinion and their majority opinion. That is what they exist to do. So I wanted to offer that history lesson. I know you know all this, Michael, but it's important, I think, for people to remember what the context of this branch of government is.
Well, exactly. And that does a lot to explain exactly where we are today, where we already know. You can basically predict where the leftist judges are going to come down on any decision. They're going to tote whatever the party line is currently, even if that is a drastic contradiction of policy or even law proposed by the left in the past, because it's whatever's convenient today, whatever helps them accumulate more power and help destroy America, make us all global citizens, the usual dribble. Unfortunately, the right doesn't really fight back in the same way, and it's strict interpretations of the law as written, which is again more in line with what the founding fathers intended. That they were supposed to be like you said, a check on power to a certain extent, or interpreting conflicting laws or disputes between the states. But this idea now that they are the moral arbiter of the Constitution is backwards. That is a reimagining of what the founders envisioned. But it also the big part of the problem is who we're putting on the Supreme Court. Is we're not putting people on the Supreme Court that are in alignment with the founding fathers' vision for the Supreme Court. Yeah, we do have Alito and Thomas up there right now, but even the other supposed conservative justices, I really want to know if Amy Coney Barrett is compromised somehow with some of the decisions that she's made or opinions that she's written recently. Something's going on there. But yeah, there's entirely too much power vested in there. And again, you look at our media. When they get a decision the left doesn't like, they discredit the court. When they do like, then all of a sudden they are the end all be all. They are the final stop. This is authority we must respect. But the minute something happens that they don't like, suddenly they're an antiquated. They're a vestige of our past. They're antiquated. We no longer need them. We shouldn't be following this opinion anyway. I mean, look at how nuts they went when they overturned the Roe v. Wade decision to send it back to the states. But this is the problem. The progressives continue to push for their agenda any way they can. We just let them do it. I don't understand why the right refuses to use the power that they've been given to make our country better. When we get decisions like this, it's like, oh well, I guess oh shucks, I guess we can't do anything about this. The Supreme Court has spoken. We're going to have unlimited anchor babies now. I'm sick and tired of it.
I am too. And I think that you have a lot of young people in Gen Z who, are attracted to, people like Nick Fuentes because they want to see authority and power flexed in the direction and in the favor of, heritage Americans. And I completely agree with that sentiment. And, this issue with the Supreme Court's a perfect opportunity to do that. It's a perfect opportunity to say, hey, you know what? We're going to impeach you guys. We're going to completely ignore what you said. You want to talk about authority. You want to talk about power. You want to talk about benevolent dictatorships. I mean, you don't have to break the Constitution to flex some power in favor of heritage Americans. You can use the Constitution to do that. That's with the powers we already have. You can impeach these justices. You can, just simply ignore these rulings. None of that is illegal. None of that is unlawful. What would be unlawful would be like, let's say if Congress passed a law and, the president signed it and then he's just like, I'm not going to enforce that. Or,
Yeah.
vice versa. If the president's trying to execute a law that's already on the books and Congress, tries to go after the president, there are some things like that would be unconstitutional. However, in this instance, impeaching these guys, ignoring them, coming out and passing laws as a legislature that clarifies these things so the Supreme Court has no legs to stand on, all that's completely fair play. But as I've said earlier, I think that there has just been a complete delegation of this authority to the Supreme Court because it's the easiest. I mean, think of it.
Yeah.
These Supreme Court justices, they never see the public limelight, very rarely. They aren't elected. They don't go and speak at town hall meetings. They don't have rallies. They don't really have any public appearance. So they're shielded from scrutiny for the most part. The most you'll ever see of them is maybe at a State of the Union address, right? Sitting at the front row in the halls of Congress. So it's easy for legislators, it's easy for presidents to kick the can to the Supreme Court because they can just say, hey, you know what? We consulted the magic 8-ball. This is what it said. Now we just have to act within that context. I'm sorry if we like it or not. It's just what the Supreme Court said. It's an easy out because no average American's ever going to interact with these guys. They have no access to them. There's no way for the public to give any feedback. So it's just an easy push off. It's an easy, delegation or degradation of duty. And that's why we've seen this, I think.
Yeah, well, to your point, it's the exact same reason Congress has created these independent regulatory agencies and other illegal, unconstitutional bodies that now govern all of us. It's so they don't have to make individual votes. They can't be held accountable. They can just blame the EPA when they do something retarded, or what other agency they want. Now, the Supreme Court did just rule that Trump can fire those people, except for the Federal Reserve Chair. As the executive branch wishes, which is correct. Again, if you're under the executive, like any other leadership in private business or wherever else, you should have control over the employees that serve under you. And if you're an employee there and you can't serve for a particular president, you should probably leave. So hopefully we do finally get these mass firings they've been talking about. But again, we have all these little judges popping up, intervening anytime we're firing people in mass or doing anything else that the people voted for. But this is another reason why we've got to actually correct this problem permanently and codify these things and why Congress needs to do their job and impeach not just some Supreme Court justices, but a lot of other judges, at least 300 federal judges as well, need to be impeached and removed that are either exceeding their authority or just inventing rules in their head to block Trump from doing deportations or block this or block that. I'm sick and tired of it. Congress needs to actually use your authority and do something. And then maybe, we won't be worrying about the midterms because with our next story here, I think we've really got to be concerned. I was already concerned about the midterms, but the Supreme Court just legalized stolen elections. No choice now, President Trump. This is a life or death emergency. You have to sign national security emergency for elections. Sorry, I was having trouble reading that. But yeah, basically, yesterday the Supreme Court ruled that, there really is no election day. You can just keep counting ballots forever, literally forever. So I guess this means California is allowed to get the result they want and then certify. But you can bet your bottom dollar you're going to see blue states exploiting this in the coming election. They won't declare. And you know what? I wish red states had the same courage because we could play this game too. And any Democrat seat within our borders, we could just not certify that election. Say, well, there's still ballots coming out there that haven't come in yet. We sent out 200,000 mail-in ballots for this particular jurisdiction, and we only got 150,000 of them back. That means there's 50,000 votes that just haven't arrived. And it's time to play hardball, play that game. They can't do anything if the state refuses to seat a rep, and they've left the election open and refused to certify it. Oh, shucks, it's January 3rd. We still haven't finished counting the votes in that election, guys. I guess we just won't be able to seat that Democrat rep. But unfortunately, our side does not have the testicles to actually do something like that. And again, utilize the law as it's currently being interpreted in our favor. But we've got to start fighting to win, because you damn well know the left will be.
Yeah, they'll play any trick they can. They'll play any angle they can get their paws on, and yet we just sit on our laurels. And I think people, make the comparison. I don't think it's a fair one, that the left is just smarter, that the left is just more more passionate about this, that they're more dedicated to the cause. I don't think that's true. I think what's actually going on is that these Republicans don't want any of this to happen. They're a part of a uniparty structure that benefits from the illusion of choice, that if you vote R, you're going to get one America, and D, you're going to get another. But the reality is it's two individuals both vying for the CEO position of Tyranny Incorporated. Like, you might get a different boilerplate answer on some things. You might get a different card stock or business card, but it's the same company. It's the same position both of these parties are vying for, which is the CEO of Tyranny Incorporated. And that's what they're doing. So you have to exit this uniparty, mentality. And that's why, in my own personal capacity, leading up to the midterms, I've been trying to support congressional candidates in my area and gubernatorial candidates and local politicians who are actually America First nationalist patriots. And they all happen to be Republican, but they're not, institutionalized Republicans. They're not, MAGA Republicans even. They're harder right wingers who actually want to get stuff done. A lot of them like Trump, but they maybe don't have his endorsement. Maybe they're running against somebody who's endorsed by the president. But there are tons of people out there like that who aren't a part of this uniparty structure, who are just, going along to get along. And that is what we have to do, because ultimately I'm not hopeful or convinced that if we just have a larger majority of Republicans in Congress, that things are going to change. I think we're just going to be disappointed. I think if Republicans had a super majority in Congress, like I'm talking a super majority, I don't actually think they would get any of this stuff done. It has to be not only a sufficient number of Republicans, has to be a sufficient quality of Republicans who actually have a constitutional worldview, who actually are willing to play the game to win. You have to have those type of people. If it's just purely, are there more D's or more R's, we're not going to win in that situation. The debt's going to continue to rack up. Kids are going to continue to get indoctrinated in government schools. We need to start redefining what does it mean, or not even redefining, rediscovering what it means to be a Republican.
Yeah, I think that's right there. Rediscovering it is what we need to do. And as you said, we need people that are not part of the power structure, that there's nobody in Washington that already has their hooks in them. We need people that are truly independent, that are willing to push back against this uniparty nonsense. Because unfortunately, even people that are good most of the time, there's a lot of them that'll suddenly make votes that I can't explain that protect the infrastructure. They circle the wagons and protect their own no matter what. There's numerous examples of this. I mean, think about, Corey Mills. They didn't want to have to censure Corey Mills a few months ago. So in exchange, they protected, what's her name? Pliskin, the rep that was on the phone texting Epstein, trying to, find the best way to make hearings damaging to Trump. This is insane. They should have thrown both of them out of Congress or censured both of them. But instead, we circle the wagons, refuse to prosecute, refuse to do anything. And it's the same thing with the DOJ right now. But this is what happens when there are no consequences, and when you allow that stuff to continue to happen, and just allow this swamp in D.C. to fester and get deeper and deeper and deeper. So yeah, we need some fresh blood up there. There has to be a real change. And right now, especially with this interpretation on elections, guys, it's time to pass the SAVE Act. And that doesn't go far enough. We need to start making some real changes there with how we administer elections. We have to get back to something people trust. And that is not going to happen on the current path. Trump calls out Senate rhinos and John Thune for refusal to fire the Senate parliamentarian and pass the Save America Act or SCOTUS ruling on mail-in ballots. He's exactly right. If they're going to make this ruling, then I guess we have to change the law and actually do something. Same with birthright citizenship. We have to pass a law and change the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. You guys have the power to do this. If it weren't for rhinos like Murkowski and others, John Thune himself, Tom Tillis, just to name a few. But this has to be done. Going into this next election is already highly contentious. It really could go either way. More and more, I keep going back and forth. But if the Democrats take the House and somehow manage to take the Senate, I think that's a pretty small possibility there. But it can happen if people are just disheartened and don't show up at the polls. If that happens, we're screwed. We're going to get 2 years of nothing. There's going to be endless investigations into the executive branch, into Trump. They'll probably impeach him multiple times. I don't think they won't have the 60 votes to convict in the Senate, so that's not going to happen. But if they were to gain control of the Senate, they could change that rule too. This is again, because the central problem is the left and the uniparty will use every ounce of power that's given to them, and our side refuses to use the same power or even a fraction of it once we give it to them.
Yeah, and I want to ask you a question here, this isn't a gotcha or anything. I am genuinely curious. I'm putting my feelers out about this. Do you think, not in all races, but do you think there is a viable argument to be made that if you live in an area where the choice is awful Republican or, let's just say moderate, just kind of normie Democrat. I'm not talking about like Nazi Maine Democrat or Zoran Mamdani, but let's say you have a choice between, Byron Donalds in Florida or David Jolly, right? That sort of dichotomy. Is it, and I'm not asking this because I'm trying to impose an opinion, I'm genuinely just curious, is it worth it for Republicans in this midterm cycle if they're not going to act on the SAVE Act, they're not going to codify any of Trump's agenda? Is it worth voting Democrat to send a message that Republicans need to change? Or do we in this midterm cycle just need to go full Republican and hope that they actually do something this time?
Well, I wouldn't vote for the Democrat, but if it's a useless rhino, I wouldn't vote for them either. Why vote for somebody's just going to stab us in the back? Hopefully in that area, there would be a good third party choice. And that's how I would send the message, because here's the trap. If a bunch of people vote for the Democrat because you've got a spineless, yellow belly, pickle kissing Republican running, then this is going to give their allies in the media something else. Oh, there's been a major shift here. That will become the narrative, and they will then use that to further demoralize Republicans and say, look, this red area has gone blue. Everything else there must be changing. They will not give an honest interpretation that it was because this was a crappy rhino candidate and the base wasn't excited. Instead, they will pretend this area is just miraculously flipped and they're in love with Democrat policies now. Even if this were an actual moderate Democrat, and I don't think there's really any of those that exist anymore, that they have pretty much bought on hook, line, and sinker, with very few exceptions, to this modern DSA interpretation of Democrats. Even though they're going after Hakeem Jeffries and whoever else right now, it's in leadership on the left. You also have Christine Gillibrand is out there yesterday or the day before. I think it was actually the day before, basically saying, "Oh, this is a good thing. This is forcing some change and some fresh air into the Democrat Party." So no, I don't think you can vote for Democrats ever. But at the same point, if you're in like Mike Lawler's district or one of these other just useless rhinos, I wouldn't vote for him. I mean, there's no way. I know a lot of people say, well, sometimes you just got to take some of the bad. No, we really don't. I don't know why people keep pretending we do. We don't have to support these people. Just because you're given a bad choice doesn't mean you have to take it. So skip the race, find a third party candidate that is worth something, and send that message. Like, hey, we don't want these losers that want open borders and unlimited immigration, or to continue to send our tax dollars to foreign nationals that are here in the U.S. We're going to get to another story there that's crazy later. But a message has to be sent. We have to break this uniparty infrastructure. And, if Trump's DOJ isn't going to do it for us and actually go after these deep state people that are embedded in the intelligence agencies and law enforcement, and not to mention sprinkled throughout all the D.C. and other capacities, well, then I guess we're going to have to do it ourselves, and that's going to have to be done the hard way.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, I don't think people should necessarily go out and vote Democrat, but I do think if you live in an area like, I'm in Florida, so I keep using that example, where you have Byron Donalds, who I do not think would be a very good governor. He's going to win, right? But maybe he doesn't have to win by a huge margin, right?
Yeah.
You send him that, hey, you're not Ron DeSantis, right? You go and look at what happened in a situation like Iowa with Kevin Lon, right? That's a situation where we want to make sure Kevin Lon gets a really big margin in his victory because he won in an upset primary, right? But maybe something like Byron Donalds, you don't want him to get a big margin because he wouldn't debate anybody. He doesn't have any policy. He's planning on just being a kind of do nothing Republican and doing some of the stuff DeSantis did. So I'm just trying to, kind of think, and it's interesting to get these thoughts out here of what can we do as the sect of the Republican Party that actually wants hard change, that isn't just purely loyal to whatever Trump says. We like a lot of what Trump does, but we're not loyal to everything he says. We're not just,
Yeah.
card-carrying Republicans. We do have some independent thoughts. We're not super happy with the party. We recognize there's a uniparty faction. How do we send the message that we're not just going to go along with whoever the Republican pick is, that we do want the best, the cream of the crop? And I do think that if we could organize and strategize a little bit and maybe, vote third party or vote for, somebody else in an election where that Republican is just going to win, right?
Yeah.
If it's a competitive election, it's either going to be a Republican or a Democrat. Obviously, I'd go with the Republican. But if it's an issue like in a ruby red state, maybe that person doesn't need to win by that high of a margin. Maybe Vivek Ramaswamy, right, who has those problems. Maybe he doesn't need to win by 15 points, right? Maybe he could win by 5 points, right? And that shows that there's not a mandate. It's a win, but it's not a mandate. And people pay attention to that.
Yeah, well, I think you're right too, and the mandate brings up a good thing. 'Cause, yeah, somebody has a runaway victory, then that is obviously how it's interpreted with good reason, because that meant the people are behind them, behind their agenda. But if you trim down those margins a little bit, then it's less popular support. Then they have to fight for and justify whatever it is that they ran on. And maybe that's to pull them further to the right. That really should be what we're doing everywhere. I mean, the primaries are the time to take these people out, but you and I both know the Senate and congressional campaign funds, they will spend millions and millions, well, probably billions of dollars to protect their uniparty rhinos. Texas is there's no better example of this than the Paxton race in Texas, Paxton and Cornyn. They spent $60 million trying to make sure Cornyn kept that seat. And, again, we talked about it ad nauseum. Lisa Murkowski running against another Republican in the general up in Alaska, $9 million to make sure she kept her seat over a far more conservative Republican that was running against her. Kelly, I always forget her last name. But anyway, this is the problem. It's the DC swamp will sabotage real conservatives, but then they'll pretend it's our fault if we don't want to come out and vote for their rhinos. We're going to have to send that message that your rhinos are no longer acceptable, especially in a lot of these deep red states. Like, there is zero reason that we should have these uniparty dipshits in a lot of these states where there is a real strong conservative base, but we're told we just have to accept them. Oh, well, this is in the position. They're the incumbent. We can't have a real challenger. We're gonna sabotage the race. We're gonna put 5 other people in to split the vote to make sure Lindsey Graham can keep his seat. We've got to push back and let it be known this is unacceptable. Maybe part of that solution is to not allow either of these funds to interfere in primaries. Make it be known that we do not want them getting in the middle of this. Now, with the exception of if you do have a real an actual Democrat that's flipped parties and is running in the race, and there's a bunch of those in local elections that we've covered in Chicago and other places where it is a literal Democrat takes their D hat off, puts on a red Republican hat, and then pretends to be a Republican, a trans Republican. Those kind of people, I'm fine with them fighting. But otherwise, you got to leave it up to the voters. The voters clearly want things to go a very different direction. But again, I think these swamp rhinos are just going to circle the wagons no matter what to protect their own, to hold on to their little fiefdom in D.C. They want nothing more than things go back to business as usual, where they're not under the microscope, and we can't allow that to happen.
Yep, absolutely, 100%. So, yeah, it's a fascinating, discussion. I think as Republicans, we do need to rediscover what that means to be a Republican. unfortunately do think when Trump kind of rewrote the Republican Party platform, and I think it was in 2020, that was
Yeah.
not a good move. The 2016 Republican Party platform was a great party platform. It's changed. We've seen Republicans continually get very squishy on, pro-life. They've gotten squishy on free speech. When it comes
Yeah.
to criticizing foreign governments, it's even gotten squishy on issues like privacy. Where we have people saying, well, you know what, maybe some sort of AI surveillance state would cut down on crime and, lessen illegal immigration. It's like, no, maybe that's not a good idea, right? So we
No.
need to get back to the principles of what it means to be a Republican, because I don't even like calling myself one anymore. It's just like, it's sort of
Yeah.
gross. So we do need to get back to that. And I think it's like an animal farm, right? The animals started to go awry when they forgot the words that were written on the side of the barn, right? When they remembered what was written on the barn at the beginning, things were great, right? But then the language started to change, right? They started to Napoleon started to rewrite it, started to disappear. And as the letter of the law, the social contract, if you will, dissipated, people
Mm.
became, as the end of the book of Judges says, they started to do what they thought was right in their own eyes, right? And it
Yeah.
led to lawlessness. And I think that's where we're heading. So we really do need to get back to words, to phrases, to definitions, to first principles. What does it mean to be a Republican? I think the Democrats are struggling with that too. What does it mean to be a Democrat? They don't even know, right? This is the consequence of the postmodern era we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
But if Republicans want to win, they're going to have to do that.
Exactly. Yeah, the Democrats have to worry about the DSA wearing the Democrat Party as a skin suit, and then winning elections. And I mean, they're literally telling us that's what they're doing right now, is they're using the party infrastructure to infiltrate and run their candidates. But unfortunately, again, there's too many on the left that think that's the right move. Yeah, I guess let's skip ahead a little bit, but try to get a few last stories in here. Supreme Court upholds schools' right to ban biological boys from girls' sports. Clarence Thomas drops in with Jim on gender dysphoria. Earlier I said, like, I feel like SCOTUS is trying to push people into a civil war, because everybody knows how passionate these blue-haired moonbats are about keeping men in the little girls' room in your school. So, this is hitting them where it hurts. They've hit the right where it hurts too, with this interpretation on citizenship, and that there is no election day; it's just election season. But this is the same type of blow to the left, where it just infuriates them. Again, I think that in this case, I agree for pretty obvious reasons where this decision came down, that you can't have these mental patients in there invading the spaces intended for women, and vice versa. That we really do have to start treating this like the mental illness it is again. I don't know if we have to actually I think bring back mental institutions is going to be necessary anyway. But we start actually getting these people the treatment they need, instead of going along with their delusions and encouraging more of it. I mean, I think this is, I think the cross-sex hormones and this acceptance is part of the reason we've seen so many violent, assault trannies out there. Because, if you don't want to play pretend with them, somehow you're the problem, and they think it's justified to, go shoot a bunch of children in a school to get that message out.
Yeah. And how sad is it that the highest court in the land has to weigh in on something like, women and men and gender and, bathrooms and
Yeah,
sports? I mean, it's just absolutely preposterous that we've made it to this point in time. But this does support that idea of, well, we have to let the experts, the ivory tower elites, give us this North Star answer. Like, this is
yeah,
ridiculous. This is not something that the Supreme Court even needs to weigh in on. Obviously, in this one, nice, it's a win. But it's
yeah,
like, it's like, the equivalent of, your whole high school saying, hey, you know what, 2 + 2
yeah,
= 5. And the teacher finally comes in and says, hey, you know what, it's 2 + 2 = 4. It's like, that's not really that big of a win. It's just a, kind of defending of reality. But that's the moment we find ourselves in. It's really sad. I guess take the wins you can. But I think that your hypothesis about them, the Supreme Court wanting to kind of agitate a civil war is not a bad one at all, because when you listen to what the, global elite have been saying, I mean, they have been, kind of pushing this civil insurrection, civil war narrative for a long time. I mean, you had that big movie come out, called Civil
Yeah,
War a few
yeah.
years ago, with Kirsten Dunn and a whole bunch of big actors pushing this very topic. Um, of
Mm-hmm.
course, we've talked about, or we've seen politicians talk about, capitalist blood running in the street, political commentators like Hassan Piker or whatever his name is,
Yes.
talking about, killing people and letting their blood drip and all this stuff. We're getting
Yep.
towards a moment like that, of course, assassination of Charlie Kirk. So it does make you wonder if they're kind of feeding, a little bit of red meat to the right. Hey, you know what? Men can't be in women's bathrooms. And we're like, yay. And then they feed a little red meat to the left. Hey, you know what? Birthright citizenship's not going anywhere. And they're like, yay. And, it's just this constant pitting. So I think that's something we really need to be, alert to, is
Yeah.
that, another civil war is not completely out of the picture. Of course, that would be horrible. I don't think anything good could come out of that. And
No.
that's exactly why they want it to happen.
Yeah. Well, and I keep wondering more and more if that isn't something like, they seem to be looking for World War III in Europe. If they could get a civil war here, keep the U.S. out of it. I mean, imagine all the changes the globalists could make here and abroad if you had a global war fighting in Europe between Russia and China and the European nations, and a civil war here in the American streets. But yeah, I really don't know. The other thing I saw brought up is how many times, and I grant that this is mostly because of the legislation that they were dealing with, or sorry, laws they were dealing with in making these decisions. But how many times the Civil War has been referenced in recent decisions handed down by the Supreme Court, that it's definitely on their mind too. But yeah, it seems to be pushing us in that direction. We are a nation divided. We do have states in open rebellion when you look at sanctuary state policies and other things where they just refuse to comply with the DOJ to say hand over voter roll information. We are already in a civil war, in my opinion. It just hasn't gone fully kinetic yet. There's been plenty of incidents like that where, you like recently with these Antifa people that were just sentenced in Texas. That I mean, make no mistake, they were planning an assault on law enforcement and ICE. They had a diversion group up there lighting fireworks off. They had snipers set up. They had a bunch of explosives. They already know that they are in a civil war. It just has not gone fully kinetic yet, and the right has not really responded in kind with the way the left has, because again, they've murdered numerous other people over the last several years. It just hasn't quite accelerated to the level where it's an open armed conflict. But that does, in my opinion, seem to be what they're pushing us towards.
And Trump hit the nail on the head with this when he gave his communism speech a few days ago, which I would encourage everyone to go listen to. It was very excellent. And he talked about that, a feature, not a bug of the communist system is assassinations. And he brought that up.
Yeah.
And he said that that is a key role because these characters who are communists, they thrive on, chaos. They thrive on this, kind of,
Yeah.
you have option A, option B, and they merge and it turns into option C, right? This constant diversion and black swan events and false flags and all this kind of stuff. That is what pushes them forward, and they end up
Yeah.
pushing figureheads out who are communist agitators. Maybe they take them offline and assassinate them so they can never
Yep.
fulfill the promise because they can't. There's just a lot of diversion and conspiracy and issues within that. And a civil war or something like that would be so great for the insiders and for the deep state and for the communist movement too, because
Yeah.
anytime you have something like that at home, right, some sort of a domestic issue, power is always going to concentrate into the federal government. They're going to be the answer to this, right? Air quotes.
Yes.
And I could very well see a scenario where the global elite, pitch some sort of a Civil War style event. And through that, one of the solutions is, hey, you know what? This whole idea of states is just a bad one, right? We don't need to have states anymore, right? This whole
Yeah.
blue red issue, that just needs to go away. And with it, the electoral college, and with it, state sovereignty, with it, the system of checks and balances. And maybe you do have something like the European Union, right? Where, yeah, you know what? There's England and there's, Italy and there's Germany and all this stuff, but ultimately it's Europe, right? That's what they want. They don't want Mississippi or Florida or Texas or Ohio. They just
Yeah.
want one nation. And then that will lead into regional government, which will lead into global government.
Yeah, and I mean that is the perfect example. And look how in Europe they're doing their best to ignore the will of the people, even though they finally got a majority vote in the EU Parliament to end this mass migration and maybe start sending some people home. They're still working their very best to make sure that doesn't happen. Pushing for this Online Safety Act, which again the Parliament shot down multiple times. Like the globalists will move forward with their agenda no matter what the people say. We've got to put a stop to it. We have to remove these same type of people from our government here in a permanent fashion, make sure they can never assume power again. And that means we're going to have to actually do something. We can't just play nice, treat it with kid gloves. People are going to have to go to jail. People have to pay a price for their attempts to destroy our nation. If they don't, nothing will ever change. And again, Congress, I'm looking at you. A lot of this is your fault. What's going on right now? You refusing to do the things that you ran on, that you promised to do, and refusing to use your power is why things have gotten to this point. And it isn't just this last election. This goes back for decades. Same with the executive office in a lot of cases. You got to actually do the hard things, even if the media doesn't like it, or they're going to sue you in court over and over and over again. We have to start fighting to win, pushing our agenda forward no matter what, and use that bully pulpit. Go out there and explain to people. Something Ronald Reagan was great at, where these addresses he would have, or if something he was doing was unpopular, he would go out and he would explain to the American people why we needed to do this for the good of our country. And a lot of times that changed public opinion, because suddenly you broke through that barrier of the media interpreting the words of our elected leaders and repackaging it out and selling the public. Because again, the media is no longer there to provide the American people with facts. They are there to push propaganda, to push an agenda for these globalists. Everybody knows it. We have to start treating them like that, and we have to start doing a better job messaging on our own. We really do need a something similar. We have to build an apparatus to inform the American public, and we have to break the infrastructure that the left has grafted themselves onto, whether that's our public schools or other government entities, that we have to break that power structure once and for all.
Yeah, absolutely. And information is the key element to that, right?
Yep.
So, we are in an information war. People need to have good information. They have to have the facts. They have to be able to articulate what they believe. And that's why, resources like libertysentinel.org, where I'm at, with Alex Newman, thenewamerican.com, a great magazine, Ex America News, these sorts of things are so crucial, because if we don't know what we believe, if we don't know what the facts are, we lose. And we have to articulate that, as Charlie Kirk did, as you said, Ronald Reagan did. And if we do that, we can win people over. But this constant left-right politics, that's not appealing to people. What's appealing to people is an articulated argument of what the truth is, of what reality is, of what the facts are, and what's best for our country. And if we can do that as patriots, I do think in the end we win, because as Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society, said, and I agree wholeheartedly, that truth is our whole strategy. Excuse me, I butchered it. Education is our full strategy, and truth is our only weapon. And that is the path we have to be on. That, education is what we want to do, and the truth is our only weapon in that battle. So get educated. That is the message.
Well said. And again, we would be a far better country if we were living up to those values, and those were the people guiding us, as opposed to these losers that we have up there today. All right, let's end on at least a somewhat humorous note. There's been a lot of this back and forth as Europeans are discovering America, because they're here for the World Cup, and seeing we're not the monsters their media and their governments pretend we are, and that it is great to be here in America. Well, apparently, America is responsible for the heat wave in Europe. Paris socialist deputy mayor blames U.S. for French heat wave. Also, I've seen in other countries where they can't have air conditioners because of racisms. I have not seen that explained yet. Or that, somehow it's America's fault because it's this pervasive the technology wasn't so pervasive here, where 80% of households have air conditioning, and actually I would guess that a lot of that remaining 20% doesn't actually need them. That they're in Alaska or northern Maine or wherever, where it just doesn't get warm enough to justify having it. But yeah, I've been in Europe in the summer, and it was disgustingly hot. And only one of the hotels we stayed at actually had air conditioning, and it barely worked. Europeans, you don't know what you're missing out. You've been lied to for decades about the climate. It's time to take. They don't want you to have any personal freedom or any control over your own life, and I think air conditioning really represents that right now for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the climate agenda is not over. This whole narrative that we've won on that, we've definitely made some progress, but these people still want to push that despite all this nonsense. But yeah, the Europeans coming over to America for the World Cup is hilarious. I love it. It's so funny and I think that's good. I think it's good for Americans to go over to Europe and to see what it's like, and for Europeans to come over to America. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of things, we can learn. For us, it's mainly going over there and being like, woo, glad we're Americans. But for them, it's good to come over and see that, it's not as bad as everyone makes it out. The one thing I will say this on a light note, the one thing I went over to Europe the first time I went there and noticed was just how skinny everybody was. That was the one
Yeah.
thing. That was the one thing, I guess, that and then the art and architecture. Those two things, I was like, man, these people are skinny. They're healthy, and they have beautiful art and architecture. And every other thing, I prefer America, but they've definitely
Yeah.
got us on that.
Well, yeah, and to your point there, with people being like skinny and fit and actually like in shape, I do think we could learn from them with some of the chemicals they don't allow in their food that we allow here. Like, these are obviously not good for us. A lot of it's been pushed by Monsanto and other giant companies in order to increase shelf life so they can sell a product longer. Um, these things are obviously not good for us. And I mean, I do think some of it is also lifestyle. Europeans walk a lot more places than we do. And when you're in a major city, that's a possibility. Now, where I live, it's not really possible to walk around to go get your groceries or wherever else. It'd be miles and miles in one direction and miles back. But I do think the foods and some other things we could learn from, but they could learn a lot from us, and then the whole planet could be a better place. Any words of wisdom you want to leave our audience with before we wrap up here, Andrew?
Oh, doom scroll less, read more, read good news, read the Bible, read classic literature, listen to good music, be what you want the country to be in your own lifestyle, in your own family. That has an echoing effect. If you dress nice, if you treat your spouse well, if you raise your kids in a biblical, patriotic way, if you interact in your community as a patriot, getting involved in local government, voting, educating others, that has a massive impact, far more than just looking at what's going on at the federal level and rolling your eyes or getting angry or getting excited.
Yeah.
Being involved locally, being involved, bettering yourself, that is where the change happens. If just 10% of us, even 5% of us, if we would look in the mirror and say, how can I be a better American? How can I be a better Christian? How can I be a better husband, wife, father, mother, son, daughter, whatever? This country would be a better place, because as a body is made up of cells, the country is made up of people. And when the cells are corrupt, the body gets sick, and same goes for the individuals in the state. So, as Michael Jackson said, start with the man in the mirror.
That's hilarious. Yeah, well, you're exactly right. And, well said. And we really do need to be looking at our local elections, because that's how a lot of this stuff happens. I had a bunch of stories that we didn't get to that could have, especially with this pride nonsense that's gone on, that your local officials are really where that power rests and what affects you most in your daily life. That's why more of us need to get involved. We need to start making that sacrifice and serve your local community. And I think if people would actually run on hard positions and not this wishy-washy nonsense, that we could really take things back. And because people are hungry for real fighters that will just throw down the gauntlet and say, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. We don't have to live this way. We are not going to be a sanctuary city. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. We are not going to fund gay bathhouses or other nonsense that we're starting to see go on in some of these areas. but we have to actually get involved. We have to do that. It doesn't matter what names they call you. I bet the voters will come out for people that have a spine that do want to take back this country. Andrew, thank you again for joining me today. To our audience, thank you for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe. Help us to grow so we can bring more people the news the mainstream media doesn't want you to hear. I'll be back tomorrow with even more.